The night was electric as the Australian Open's opening gala reached its crescendo. I was among the privileged few invited to Melbourne Park's Grand Pavilion, a space transformed into a dreamscape of lights, music, and tennis legends. The scent of freshly cut grass and the faint echo of a tennis ball hitting a racket seemed to linger in the air, setting the mood for the week ahead. As I wandered through the illuminated courts, my excitement grew. This was where history would unfold. Yet something felt off. The air was too cold for a summer evening, and the shadows cast by the floodlights seemed to dance unnaturally. My reflection in the trophy case, was it just me, or did it smirk back at me? My thoughts were interrupted by the sight of an old man sitting alone at the edge of the practice court. His white hair glowed under the stadium lights, and his eyes seemed to pierce through the festive crowd. He beckoned me closer with a subtle nod. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached. "Do you believe in second chances?" he asked, his voice gravelly but oddly melodic. Before I could answer, he handed me a weathered tennis ball. "Hold on to this," he said cryptically. "It's seen victories and curses alike." I chuckled nervously, assuming it was part of some elaborate tradition. But when I turned to thank him, he had vanished. The ball in my hand felt heavier than it should, almost as if it pulsed with its own heartbeat. As the evening wore on, I found myself drawn to Court 13, an older court tucked away from the main stadium. Whispers among the staff claimed it was cursed, a place where dreams of glory turned into nightmares. Dismissing it as mere superstition, I stepped onto the court, gripping the mysterious tennis ball. The moment my feet touched the ground, the lights flickered and a chilling breeze swept through. I tossed the ball up and served, its sharp thwack echoing eerily. The ball didn't bounce back as expected. Instead, it rolled to the net and stopped, as if daring me to retrieve it. With each step I took toward it, the shadows around the court seemed to deepen, encroaching upon the edges of reality. When I picked up the ball, a loud crack shattered the silence. The court around me began to change, the bright floodlights dimming into a murky twilight. The once pristine court was now overgrown with wild vines, the air thick with the scent of decay. From the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. Figures dressed in outdated tennis attire, their hollow eyes locked onto me. One by one, they stepped forward, their footsteps soundless, but their intent clear. "Play," one of them rasped, tossing an old racket at my feet. The grip was sticky, like dried blood. The match had begun, and I realized this was no ordinary game. It was a contest for my very soul. The first serve came from the other side, impossibly fast and precise. I barely managed to return it, the vibration from the impact rattling my arm. The crowd of shadows clapped, their applause sounding more like the rustling of leaves in a storm. Each point I won seemed to weaken them, but with every point I lost, the shadows grew bolder, their forms more solid. They taunted me, voices echoing in my mind. "You can't win. The court owns you now." My determination hardened. I wasn't just fighting for survival. I was fighting for escape, for the chance to prove that courage could outmatch fear. Sweat dripped from my brow as the game intensified. The score was tied, and my body screamed for rest. The old tennis ball felt alive in my hand, its weight shifting as if guiding me. "Trust it," a voice whispered, not from the shadows, but from within. On the next serve, I hit the ball with every ounce of strength and focus I could muster. The sound of the impact reverberated like a thunderclap, and the ball blazed with an unearthly light. It struck the opposing side and the shadows recoiled, their forms dissolving like smoke in the wind. The court began to restore itself, the vines retreating and the air clearing. I fell to my knees, the ball now cool and inert in my hand. As I stood, catching my breath, the old man reappeared at the edge of the court. "Well done," he said, his voice filled with both pride and sorrow. "You've broken the curse, for now." I approached him, desperate for answers. He revealed that Court 13 was the site of a tragedy decades ago, where a rising star had collapsed during a match, his ambition consumed by the pressure. The ball I held was his, a relic cursed by his unfulfilled dreams and the collective grief of those who loved him. "You've proven that courage and skill can conquer even the darkest shadows," the man said. "But remember, courage must be constant, or the shadows will return." Before I could respond, the old man began to fade, his form dissolving like mist in the morning sun. The court returned to its modern state, the distant hum of the Australian Open's festivities breaking the eerie silence. I looked down at the tennis ball, now worn and ordinary. Clutching it tightly, I left court 13, the weight of the night's event settling over me like a heavy cloak. Yet as I rejoined the crowds, a strange sense of peace washed over me. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, my resolve tempered by the fire of fear. The next morning, as the first match of the tournament began, I couldn't help but glance toward court 13. It stood empty, its gates locked as if nothing had happened. But I knew the truth. The shadows might have been defeated, but they were not gone. They lingered, waiting for another soul to challenge them, another dreamer to test their mettle against the curse. I slipped the ball into my bag, a silent vow forming in my heart. If the shadows ever returned, I would be ready. As I left Melbourne Park, the city's lights shimmering in the distance, I realized the true lesson of the night. Fear is not a weakness, but a challenge. A reminder that even in our darkest moments, we possess the power to rise. And as long as I carried that memory, no shadow could ever truly claim me. Yet as I walked away, I felt a cold breeze and heard the faint echo of a ball being served. The shadows, it seemed, were not done with me just yet. The stadium stood majestic, drenched in the golden hues of the setting sun. Melbourne Park, alive with the echoes of cheers and tennis balls ricocheting off rackets, was the center of the world tonight. But as the final matches wrapped up and the crowds thinned, I lingered. There was something alluring about the emptiness of Rod Laver Arena at night, a silence that whispered secrets. I wasn't supposed to be there after hours, but the thought of practicing alone, under the same lights that had witnessed champions, was irresistible. Little did I know, those lights hid more than just shadows. The first few minutes were serene. The arena's towering stands seemed to watch over me as I rallied with the practice machine. Each ball's impact echoed eerily, bouncing off the ghostly silence. But soon the air grew heavy, oppressive. A sudden flicker of the floodlights caught my attention. I stopped, scanning the empty stands. That's when I saw it. A figure seated in the uppermost row, unmoving, watching. "Who's there?" My voice echoed, swallowed by the cavernous space. The figure didn't respond. Instead, something fluttered down from their direction, landing just outside the court. A piece of paper. Curiosity overpowered fear. I walked over, my footsteps unnaturally loud. Picking up the note, my blood ran cold as I read the jagged handwriting. "The championship demands its sacrifice." A gust of wind swept through the arena, impossibly cold for a summer night. It carried with it faint whispers, voices too many to discern. But one phrase stood out clearly: "You should have left." My breath hitched. I spun around, but the figure was gone. The floodlights flickered again, and when they stabilized, I saw something that wasn't there before. A trophy, gleaming under the artificial light, placed unnervingly at the center of the court. I approached it cautiously. It was a replica of the Australian Open's championship trophy, but this one was tarnished, its once polished surface marred by deep scratches and smudges. As I reached out to touch it, an icy chill coursed through my veins. "Win it or lose yourself," a voice growled, deep and resonant, as though the very walls of the arena were speaking. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and the trophy vanished before my eyes. Suddenly, the court was bathed in a harsh red light. The air vibrated with an unholy hum. Opposite me, a figure materialized, a shadowy entity wearing a tattered tennis uniform. Its face was obscured, its form constantly shifting, but its presence exuded menace. It held a racket, and at its feet lay a ball, glowing faintly. "Play," it commanded, pointing its racket at me. I had no choice. Picking up my racket, I assumed position. The shadow served first, its movements impossibly fast. The ball screamed toward me, leaving a trail of crimson light. I barely managed to return it. The rally began, each hit feeling heavier, more draining, as though the ball was sapping my strength. The crowd, or what sounded like one, cheered, though the stands were empty. Their cries grew louder with every point, a maddening chorus of encouragement and despair. The ground beneath me began to shift. The once pristine surface of the court cracked, revealing glimpses of something dark and pulsating beneath. The net dissolved into a writhing mass of shadows, and the lines marking the court glowed an ominous red. My opponent laughed, a guttural, echoing sound that made my skin crawl. Sweat dripped down my face as I struggled to keep up. The shadow was relentless, each shot more brutal than the last. My fear seemed to fuel it, making it stronger. I remembered the note. The championship demands its sacrifice. Was it my fear it wanted, my life, or something worse? A memory surfaced, stories of players who had mysteriously disappeared after late-night practices, their names erased from history. Their faces flashed before me now, distorted and pleading, trapped within the court's cracks. "Help us," they seemed to cry. But how could I? Desperation gave way to determination. I realized the shadow wasn't unbeatable. Its form flickered whenever I played with confidence, each precise shot making it weaker. Summoning every ounce of courage, I focused on the game, ignoring the phantom crowd and the shifting court. For the first time, I had the upper hand. Match point. My serve. The ball felt unnaturally heavy in my hand, pulsing like a heartbeat. I tossed it into the air, striking it with every bit of strength I had left. Time seemed to freeze as the ball sailed across the net. The shadow lunged, but it was too late. The ball hit the ground, shattering the glowing lines of the court. A deafening scream erupted as the shadow disintegrated, its form consumed by the cracks beneath. The court returned to normal, silent and still. I stood there gasping for breath when the voice returned. "You've won this time, but the championship never ends." The words echoed ominously as the trophy reappeared, pristine and shining. I didn't dare touch it. Clutching my racket, I fled the arena, vowing never to return. As I stepped outside, the first light of dawn broke the horizon. But even in the safety of daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Victory isn't always sweet. Some games are better left unplayed, and some trophies come with a cost too great to bear. In our pursuit of greatness, we must be wary of the shadows that follow. To this day, the Rod Laver Arena holds its secrets, waiting for its next challenger. The arena stood silent under the moonlight, its grandeur hiding the terrors it had witnessed. As the echoes of the past faded, a chilling question lingered in the air. What price would the next player pay to claim the trophy? And would they survive to tell the tale? The night of the Australian Open 2025 final was a spectacle of light and energy. Rod Laver Arena sparkled under the floodlights, and the crowd buzzed with excitement, their cheers reverberating through the crisp Melbourne air. I, a wildcard entrant and the youngest player to ever reach the final, stood in the players' tunnel, gripping my racket tightly. This was my moment to shine, a dream etched into my soul since childhood. But beneath the adrenaline coursing through my veins, a strange unease simmered. As I stepped onto the court, the vibrant lights momentarily blinded me, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadowy figure in the stands. Shaking off the thought, I focused on the task ahead, unaware that this would be a night unlike any other. A night where tennis wasn't the only game being played. The first serve echoed like a gunshot, drawing gasps from the crowd as I landed an ace. Confidence surged through me, but as the match progressed, something began to feel wrong. Each time I glanced at the stands, I noticed a figure seated in the front row, draped in an impossibly dark cloak. Their face was obscured, and while the rest of the audience roared with excitement, this figure remained unnervingly still. Between points, I felt a cold breeze sweep across the court, though the night was warm. It carried a faint whisper, unintelligible but eerily persistent. My focus wavered as the whispers grew louder, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just playing for the championship, but for something far greater and far more dangerous. As the match reached its second set, I found myself in a grueling rally, the kind that tests not just skill, but willpower. My opponent delivered a powerful forehand, sending me scrambling to return it. The ball grazed the net and landed just inside the baseline. A perfect shot. The crowd erupted in cheers, but my attention was elsewhere. The shadowy figure in the front row had vanished, leaving behind an empty seat. My chest tightened as I realized the whispers hadn't disappeared. They were closer now, circling me like an invisible fog. A shiver ran down my spine as I heard my name whispered, clear and deliberate, as though spoken directly into my ear. I turned abruptly, but there was no one there. During the break, I retreated to the bench, trying to steady my racing heart. A ball boy approached with a sealed envelope, his expression unreadable. "This is for you," he said quietly, before disappearing into the shadows. The envelope bore no name, only a wax seal imprinted with a strange insignia, a crescent moon encircled by thorns. My hands trembled as I opened it to reveal a single sentence: "Meet me at Melbourne Park Pavilion after the match." My heart sank. Who had sent this? Why? Despite the chaos in my mind, I returned to the court, determined to finish the match, even as I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching my every move. The match ended with a hard-fought victory, but my triumph was hollow. The crowd's cheers seemed distant, muffled by the pounding of my heart. With the trophy in hand, I exited the court, bypassing the media frenzy to follow the instructions from the mysterious note. Melbourne Park Pavilion loomed ahead, its Gothic architecture bathed in an eerie moonlight. The wind howled through the empty corridors as I stepped inside, the heavy wooden door creaking shut behind me. The scent of damp earth and decayed roses filled the air. My footsteps echoed as I ventured deeper into the pavilion, the whispers now louder and more distinct. "You shouldn't have come," they murmured over and over, in a chilling harmony. In the center of the pavilion stood a lone table, draped in black velvet, with an ornate antique mirror resting atop it. The reflection it cast was warped, showing not the room but a desolate, ash-gray landscape under a blood-red sky. My breath hitched as I noticed a figure in the mirror, cloaked in darkness, staring directly at me. A voice, deep and resonant, emanated from the mirror. "You've crossed into my domain." The mirror's surface rippled like water, and the reflection's hand reached out, breaking through the glass. I stumbled back, but the hand gripped my wrist, its icy touch sending a shock through my body. "You owe me," it growled, pulling me closer. Before I could resist, I was yanked into the mirror, landing in the barren wasteland I had glimpsed earlier. The figure towered over me, its glowing red eyes filled with malice. "Every victory has a price," it hissed. My protests were drowned by a cacophony of voices, the whispers now a deafening roar. The figure revealed itself as Lucian, a malevolent spirit who thrived on the ambition and desperation of athletes who dared to seek glory. He held up the envelope, now burning with an unholy light. "You signed the contract the moment you opened this," Lucian sneered. Despair clawed at me as I realized I had been lured into a trap of my own making. Despite the overwhelming fear, something within me refused to submit. I remembered the cheers of the crowd, the dreams that had driven me to this moment. Clutching my racket, now glowing faintly with a golden light, I faced Lucian. "You can't take what's mine," I said, my voice steady despite the terror. Lucian laughed, a hollow, bone-chilling sound, and lunged at me. In the ensuing battle, I discovered that the racket was no longer just a tool. It was a weapon, charged with the hope and determination of countless players before me. The clash of light and shadow shook the barren realm, until finally Lucian dissolved into a wisp of smoke, his cries fading into the void. The wasteland began to collapse, and I was thrust back into the pavilion, gasping for breath. The mirror lay shattered on the ground, its pieces reflecting only the dim light of the room. As I stumbled out into the night, the city's vibrant lights and familiar sounds grounded me, pulling me back to reality. But the locket around my neck, a trophy given during the match, glowed faintly, a reminder of the ordeal. I realized Lucian's warning still lingered. Ambition unchecked could lead to darkness. The Australian Open trophy felt heavier in my hands now, not just a symbol of victory, but of survival. As the first rays of dawn illuminated Melbourne, I understood the lesson hidden within the terror. Greatness is not about winning at any cost, but about the strength to face one's fears and the shadows they cast. My journey had only just begun, and as I walked away, I knew I would return to the court. Not for glory, but for the love of the game. With the echoes of the night Are you forever brave enough etched to in my face what soul? lies beyond the surface? If you want more chilling tales like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Stay in the shadows and never miss a story. Subscribe now and join me for more terrifying adventures. You never know who or what might be watching.